Come with me. Stranded poor girl cross paths with Mafia boss. The bitter wind whipped across the empty road, carrying stinging flakes of snow that bit at Mia's exposed skin. She hugged herself tighter, her thin jacket offering little protection against the ruthless cold. Her worthless car sat silent behind her, nothing but a useless heap of metal on the shoulder of this desolate stretch of highway. The darkness pressed in around her, broken only by the weak beam of her phone's flashlight, until that too flickered and died. "Great," she muttered, shoving the dead device into her pocket. "Just great." Mia's breath came out in visible puffs as she paced, trying to keep warm. Each passing minute seemed to drag, the temperature dropping steadily as night settled in. The sound of an approaching vehicle made her pulse quicken. The first car she'd seen in over an hour. A sleek, black SUV slowed as it approached, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow. The vehicle came to a stop beside her, and the tinted passenger window rolled down with a quiet hum. Mia's heart thundered in her chest as she found herself staring into the darkest eyes she'd ever seen. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story." The man behind the wheel radiated power. His sharp features were cast in shadows, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw, the calculating gleam in his gaze as he assessed her. His expensive suit spoke of wealth, but there was something else about him, something dangerous that made her want to step back. "Need a ride?" His voice was deep and smooth, yet held an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. Mia hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to decline. But the bitter cold and the empty road made the decision for her. "Yes, thank you," she managed, her voice smaller than she'd intended. The door unlocked with a click. As she climbed in, the warmth of the luxury vehicle enveloped her, but did nothing to ease the tension coiling in her stomach. The leather seat was soft beneath her, the interior immaculate, and smelling of expensive cologne. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the road as he pulled away from her stranded car. "The nearest town," Mia replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's a hotel there where I can wait until morning." He gave a slight nod, his hands gripping the steering wheel with controlled strength. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. Every few minutes, she caught him watching her from the corner of his eye, his expression unreadable. The heat from the vents couldn't warm the chill that ran through her when their eyes met in the rear-view mirror. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew her in even as it warned her away. His presence filled the vehicle, making the space feel smaller, more intimate than it should. Snow continued to fall outside, creating a hypnotic pattern in the headlights. The windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm, matching the pounding of Mia's heart. She found herself studying his profile, the strong nose, the set of his mouth, the way his dark hair fell perfectly despite the weather. "I'm Mia," she offered, if only to break the weighted silence. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Luca," he responded, the name rolling off his tongue like velvet over steel. The drive continued in tense silence, the space between them electric with unspoken words and hidden intentions. When they finally pulled into the parking lot of a small hotel, Mia felt both relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment. "Get out," Luca said, his tone cold and dismissive, yet somehow still making her pulse race. Mia gathered her things, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the door handle. As she stepped out into the snow, she couldn't help but look back. Their eyes met one final time, and in that moment, something passed between them, something that made her breath catch and her skin tingle with awareness. The hotel room door clicked shut behind Mia, and she leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. The cheap wallpaper and dated furniture felt worlds away from the luxury of Luca's SUV. Her hands were still trembling as she switched on the lamp, casting a warm glow across the small space. Outside, the storm howled fiercer than before, rattling the window panes. But it wasn't the weather that had her heart racing. It was the memory of those dark eyes, that commanding presence that seemed to fill every space he occupied. Mia dropped her bag on the worn carpet and ran her fingers through her snow-dampened hair. "Get it together," she whispered to herself, but her skin still tingled where his gaze had touched her. The bathroom mirror reflected her flushed cheeks and bright eyes. She barely recognized herself. There was something different in her expression, something awakened. Steam filled the small space as she turned the shower on full blast, hoping the hot water would wash away the lingering tension in her shoulders. Under the steady stream, Mia closed her eyes, but immediately regretted it. Behind her eyelids, she saw him again. The sharp cut of his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel with controlled power, the subtle flecks of muscle beneath his expensive suit. The water cascaded over her, but it did nothing to cool the heat rising in her chest at these thoughts. Every detail about him spoke of wealth and power. The perfectly tailored suit, the luxury vehicle, the way he carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. But there was something else, too, something dangerous that lurked beneath the surface. The memory of his voice, deep and commanding, sent another shiver through her despite the hot water. After her shower, Mia wrapped herself in the hotel's thin robe and sat on the edge of the bed. Her wet hair dripped onto her shoulders as she stared out the window. The snow was falling harder now, creating a white curtain that obscured everything beyond the glass. The storm matched her internal turmoil, wild, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. The heat from the shower had done nothing to calm her racing thoughts. If anything, it had made things worse. In the quiet of the room, with nothing but the storm for company, she couldn't escape the magnetic pull of her memories from the ride. The way the air had crackled between them in the confined space of his car. The subtle scent of his cologne that still clung to her clothes. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room in stark white for a brief moment. In that flash, reality seemed to hit her with the same sudden intensity. She didn't know this man. Not really. Luca was a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere on a deserted road. A man whose very presence screamed wealth and authority, but also danger. What kind of man drove around in a vehicle like that, wearing a suit that probably cost more than she made in months? What kind of man could make her feel so small, so vulnerable, with just a look? The questions tumbled through her mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Mia hugged herself tighter as thunder rolled overhead. The storm outside matched the turbulence in her chest, a mixture of attraction and unease that she couldn't shake. She watched the snow swirl against the darkness, each flake a reminder of how lost she felt in this moment. The cheap bedside clock ticked away the minutes as she sat there, unable to move, unable to stop thinking about him, about the way his presence had filled the car, about the current of danger that ran beneath his controlled exterior, about how, despite every warning bell ringing in her head, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. Morning light filtered through the hotel window, casting long shadows across Mia's bed. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, displaying an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, but the deep voice on the other end sent a jolt through her body. "Did you sleep well?" Luca's tone was smooth, controlled, yet somehow warmer than the night before. Mia sat up, suddenly aware of her racing pulse. "Well enough," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "How did you get my number?" The hotel desk was accommodating. There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "I've contacted a mechanic about your car. They can't look at it for a few hours." Mia ran her fingers through her tangled hair, weighing her options. The practical part of her brain screamed that accepting more help from this stranger was dangerous, but exhaustion from the previous night's ordeal won out. "I appreciate the help, but I'll pick you up in 30 minutes, he cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We can get breakfast while we wait." Before she could protest, the line went dead. Mia stared at her phone, torn between irritation at his presumption and a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. True to his word, Luca arrived exactly 30 minutes later. He stood in the hotel lobby, commanding attention without effort. His dark suit was immaculate, a stark contrast to her simple jeans and sweater. His eyes traveled over her slowly, and Mia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Ready?" he asked, holding the door open. The morning air was crisp, the snow from last night pristine and untouched. They drove to a small cafe in comfortable silence. The tension between them had shifted from last night's uncertainty to something else, something that made Mia's skin tingle whenever their eyes met. Over steaming cups of coffee, Luca's carefully maintained facade began to crack. His smiles came easier, his shoulders relaxed slightly. He asked about her life, her work, and actually listened to her answers. Mia found herself opening up, drawn in by his intense focus and genuine interest. "You're not what I expected," she admitted, wrapping her hands around her second cup of coffee. Luca's eyebrow lifted. "And what did you expect? Someone more—" She searched for the right word. "Intimidating." A dark smile played at his lips. "Maybe you should still be intimidated." But his eyes held a warmth that contradicted his words, and Mia felt herself leaning closer across the table. The chemistry between them crackled like static electricity, making every casual touch feel charged with meaning. As they waited for news about her car, Luca showed her around the small town. His hand occasionally brushed her lower back as they walked, each touch sending sparks through her body. He knew the area well, sharing stories about local landmarks that made her laugh despite herself. It wasn't until they stopped for lunch that everything changed. While Mia excused herself to the restroom, Luca checked his phone. A news notification caught his eye, a headline about a violent clash between rival families. His thumb froze over the screen as he read further. The article detailed how his crew had engaged in a brutal firefight with Marco Moretti's men the previous night. 3 dead, several wounded. But it was the accompanying photo that made his blood run cold. Moretti himself, standing outside his compound, his face twisted in rage. Luca's mind raced back to his background check on Mia. Moretti. Her last name was Moretti. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman he'd spent the morning with, the one who made him feel things he hadn't felt in years, was Marco Moretti's daughter. His fingers tightened around the phone as anger and betrayal warred, with an unexpected surge of guilt. He'd let his guard down, allowed himself to be charmed by the enemy's daughter. But as he heard Mia's footsteps returning, another emotion rose to the surface, a fierce protectiveness he couldn't explain. Looking up, he watched her approach the table, her smile genuine and unsuspecting. In that moment, Luca made his decision. He would keep his secret, protect her from the truth of who he was. At least for now. The weight of this knowledge settled heavy in his chest as she sat back down, her eyes bright with trust he didn't deserve. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hotel parking lot as Luca sat in his SUV, eyes fixed on the entrance. He'd positioned himself perfectly, close enough to watch, far enough to remain unnoticed. His phone buzzed with updates from his men about Moretti's movements, but his attention kept drifting back to Mia as she emerged from the hotel. She looked different in daylight, softer, more vulnerable. Her dark hair caught the sunlight as she walked to the small cafe next door. Luca's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, fighting the urge to follow her inside. He needed distance, needed to remember who she was, who he was. But when his phone rang and Mia's name flashed on the screen, he answered without hesitation. "I thought maybe we could grab lunch," she said, her voice warm and hesitant. "To thank you for all your help." He should say no. He had a dozen reasons to refuse. Instead, he heard himself agreeing. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other at a small Italian restaurant. Mia's eyes lit up as she talked about her dreams of opening her own business, far from her family's influence, though she never specified what that influence was. Luca found himself leaning in, drawn to her animated expressions and genuine passion. "You make it sound so simple," he said, watching her gesticulate with her fork. "Walking away from family. Nothing about it is simple." A shadow crossed her face. "But sometimes you have to choose yourself, you know?" Luca did know. He just never thought he'd have the luxury of that choice. They spent the afternoon walking through the town's small park, their shoulders brushing occasionally. Mia's laugh was infectious, and Luca caught himself smiling more than he had in years. She had a way of making him forget who he was, what he did. For a few precious hours, he was just a man walking with a beautiful woman, not a mafia boss plotting against her father. "You're different than I thought you'd be," Mia said, as they paused by a frozen fountain. "How so?" "Less scary." She grinned up at him. "When you first pulled up in that black SUV, I thought you might be some kind of mobster." The irony of her words hit him like a physical blow. He forced a laugh, but it felt hollow in his throat. As the afternoon wore on, Luca noticed little things about her. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she really smiled. Each detail made it harder to maintain his emotional distance. They grabbed coffee as the sun began to set, and Mia's fingers brushed his as she took her cup. The contact sent an electric current through his body, and for a moment their eyes locked. The attraction between them was palpable, dangerous in its intensity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for making me feel safe here." The guilt hit him hard. If she knew who he really was, what he'd done to her family's people just yesterday, she wouldn't feel safe at all. She'd run. He walked her back to her hotel, each step feeling heavier than the last. The truth sat on his tongue like poison, but he couldn't bring himself to speak it. Not when she looked at him with such trust, such openness. At her door, Mia turned to him with a smile that made his chest ache. "Would you like to come in?" The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Luca wanted nothing more than to say yes, to follow her inside and forget about everything else, but the weight of his secret held him back. "Another time," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He watched her disappear into her room, the click of the door echoing in the empty hallway. Standing there, Luca realized with startling clarity that Mia had become more than just Moretti's daughter, more than a means to an end. She was someone he wanted to protect, someone he couldn't bear to hurt. The evening air grew thick with tension as Mia stepped out of her hotel room. She needed fresh air after spending hours thinking about Luca, about the way he'd looked at her before leaving. The parking lot was quiet, illuminated by flickering street lamps that cast long shadows across the pavement. A dark figure emerged from behind a parked car. "Miss Moretti." The voice was rough, unfriendly. "Your father's been looking for you." Mia's blood ran cold. She took a step back, her hand fumbling for her phone. The man moved closer, his face coming into the light, scarred, mean, with eyes that promised violence. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Don't play dumb." He closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides. "Your father wants to know who you've been talking to. Who's been helping you hide?" "I'm not hiding." Mia's back hit the wall, the rough brick scraped against her jacket. "Leave me alone." The thug's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. "You're coming with me." A shadow materialized behind him. In one fluid motion, Luca appeared, his presence electric and deadly. His hand clamped down on the thug's wrist, twisting until bones cracked. The man howled, releasing Mia. "Touch her again," Luca's voice was ice, "and it'll be the last thing you do." The thug swung with his free hand. Luca moved like water, ducking the punch and driving his fist into the man's solar plexus. The violence was precise, calculated. There was no wasted movement as Luca systematically took the man apart. Mia couldn't look away. Luca's face remained eerily calm as he slammed the thug against a car, the metal denting under the impact. When the man tried to pull a knife, Luca caught his wrist and twisted until the blade clattered to the ground. The sound echoed in the quiet lot. "Who sent you?" Luca's question was soft, almost gentle, but his grip on the man's throat was anything but. "Go to hell!" The thug spat blood. Luca's response was to drive his knee into the man's ribs. The crack was audible. Last chance. Through gasping breaths, the thug muttered something Mia couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Luca's eyes go darker. He leaned in close, whispered something that made all color drain from the thug's face. When Luca finally released him, the man stumbled back, clutching his ribs. "This isn't over," he wheezed, but his eyes were full of fear as he limped away into the darkness. Only then did Luca turn to Mia. The deadly calm in his eyes shifted to concern as he stepped toward her. His hands, so brutal moments before, were gentle as they checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" His voice was soft now, worried. Mia shook her head, unable to speak. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but not entirely from fear. The way Luca touched her, careful, tender, created a stark contrast to the violence she'd just witnessed. "You're shaking." His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing her cheeks. The tenderness in his touch made her breath catch. She should be terrified. She'd just watched him break a man without hesitation or remorse. But instead of fear, she felt safe, protected. His presence wrapped around her like a shield, and despite everything she'd just seen, she found herself leaning into his touch. Their eyes met in the dim light. The coldness that had filled them during the fight was gone, replaced by something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken for entirely different reasons. In that moment, standing in a dark parking lot with the echo of violence still hanging in the air, Mia felt a connection to Luca that defied explanation. The night air hung heavy with unspoken words as Mia paced her hotel room. Her hands still trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The image of Luca, controlled, lethal, precise, played on repeat in her mind. She couldn't shake the way he'd moved, like a predator, taking down that thug with practiced ease. But it was what came after that truly unsettled her. The gentleness of his touch, the warmth in his eyes when he'd checked her for injuries. The contrast was jarring. She pressed her fingers to her cheeks where his hands had been, remembering the tenderness that seemed so at odds with his violent nature. Across the parking lot, in his own room, Luca stood at the window, watching Mia's shadow move behind her curtains. His knuckles were bruised from the fight, a dull ache that helped ground him in reality. He shouldn't care about her. She was Moretti's daughter, the enemy. Every instinct honed from years in the family business screamed at him to use this opportunity to exploit her vulnerability. Instead, he found himself wanting to protect her. The morning brought no clarity. Mia found Luca in the hotel's small cafe, sitting alone with a cup of black coffee. He looked different in the daylight, still dangerous but somehow more approachable. His suit was immaculate, as if last night's violence had never happened. "We need to talk," Mia said, sliding into the seat across from him. Luca's jaw tightened. "About what happened last night." "About everything." She leaned forward, studying his face. "That man knew who I was. He mentioned my father." "Lots of people have enemies," Luca deflected, but his grip on the coffee cup tightened. "And you?" Mia pressed. "How do you fit into all this? The way you fought?" She shook her head. "That wasn't self-defense. That was experience." Luca's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "Maybe you should be more careful about asking questions you don't want answers to." "I want answers," Mia insisted. "You show up exactly when I need help. You're clearly skilled in violence, and now there are men looking for me, mentioning my father." She took a breath, steadying herself. "What aren't you telling me about your connection to my father?" The silence between them grew thick. Luca's eyes, usually so controlled, betrayed a flash of conflict. His fingers drummed once on the table, the only sign of his internal struggle. "Your father," he finally said, voice low and controlled, "is not a topic for discussion." "Why not?" Mia challenged, frustration building. "You know something. I can see it in your face." Luca stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Drop it, Mia." His voice held an edge of warning, but underneath, she caught something else. Was it pain? "I can't," she said, rising to meet his gaze. "Not when I know you're hiding something important." They stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. The cafe seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them and the growing tension between them. Luca's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his features that reminded her of last night's violence. But he said nothing. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Mia with her unanswered questions and the maddening certainty that whatever he was hiding would change everything between them. The hotel lounge was quiet, the soft jazz music barely a whisper in the background. Mia sat across from Luca, her fingers wrapped around a glass of red wine she'd barely touched. The evening light filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows across their table. Luca's presence filled the space between them, commanding yet somehow softer than usual. His suit jacket was draped over the chair, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms marked with faint scars. Those hands that had been so violent yesterday now cradled a glass of whiskey with surprising gentleness. "Tell me about yourself," Mia said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The real you, not whatever image you're trying to maintain." Luca's dark eyes met hers, considering. He took a slow sip of his whiskey before setting it down. "What makes you think there's more to see?" "The way you checked on me yesterday," Mia said softly. "That wasn't the action of someone who's just violent. There was care there." Something shifted in Luca's expression, a crack in his carefully maintained facade. He ran a finger along the rim of his glass, lost in thought for a moment. "I was 12 when my father first taught me to fight," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "Not the schoolyard stuff, real fighting. Survival." He paused, watching her reaction. He said, "In our world, you either learn to be the predator or you become prey." Mia leaned forward slightly, drawn in by this glimpse beneath his armor. "Your father, was he like you?" A bitter smile touched Luca's lips. Worse. Much worse. Everything I know about power, about control, it came from watching him destroy people who crossed him. His jaw tightened. But he also taught me about loyalty, about protecting what's yours at any cost. And is that what you do? Protect what's yours? Luca's gaze intensified, making Mia's breath catch. Always. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Mia took a sip of wine, trying to steady her racing heart. It must have been lonely, growing up like that. Lonely? Luca seemed to taste the word. I never thought about it that way. There was always too much happening, too many threats to watch for. He leaned back, his expression distant. Your father would understand that kind of life. Mia's fingers tightened around her glass. What do you mean? Let's just say our families have history. Luca's voice took on an edge. Complex history. What kind of history? Mia pressed, sensing something important in his tone. But Luca had already retreated behind his walls. The kind that's better left in the past, he said firmly, though his eyes held a conflict she couldn't quite read. The attraction between them crackled like electricity, made more intense by the pieces of himself he'd shared. Mia found herself studying the lines of his face, the tension in his shoulders, seeing both the dangerous man who could fight with lethal precision and the boy who'd been taught that violence was the only way to survive. There's more you're not telling me, she said softly. It wasn't a question. Luca met her gaze, and for a moment she saw a flash of something that looked like regret. There's always more, Mia. Some truths are better left unspoken. The weight of his words settled over them like a heavy blanket. Mia wanted to push further, to understand the darkness that lurked behind his careful control, but she could sense his walls going back up. Still, what he'd shared had changed something between them. She'd seen beneath the surface, caught a glimpse of the man behind the power, and it only made her want to know more. Mia's hands trembled as she stared at her phone screen. The local news article showed chaos, broken windows, police tape, and there, in the center of it all, her father's face. The headline screamed about mob violence, about territory disputes and rising tensions between crime families. But it was the smaller photo beneath that made her blood run cold. A grainy surveillance shot of a tall, dark-haired man leaving the scene. Even in the poor quality image, she'd recognize that powerful stance anywhere. Luca DeMarco. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The way he'd watched her, his careful questions about her family, the violence she'd witnessed. It all made terrible sense now. She found him in the hotel bar, nursing a drink. The usual crowd had thinned out, leaving them almost alone in the dimly lit space. Mia's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor as she approached, her phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Were you ever going to tell me? Her voice cracked with emotion. Or was this all just some sick game to you? Luca looked up slowly, his dark eyes immediately registering the phone in her hand. Something shifted in his expression. A resignation, perhaps, or relief that the charade was finally over. Mia, he started, but she cut him off. Don't. She slammed the phone down on the bar, the news article glaring up at them both. You're him, aren't you? The DeMarco boss everyone whispers about. The one who's been trying to destroy my father's business. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Luca didn't deny it. He simply watched her, his face a mask of careful control. Yes, he said finally, his voice low and steady. I am. The confirmation hit her like a physical blow. Mia stepped back, her legs suddenly unsteady. All this time, was any of it real? Or was I just a way to get to my father? Luca stood, his height and presence filling the space between them. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Mia demanded, tears burning in her eyes. Tell me, Luca. Tell me how you could sit there, day after day, knowing who I was, knowing what you're trying to do to my family. Your father isn't the man you think he is, Luca cut in, an edge of steel in his voice. The things he's done. And what about the things you've done? Mia shot back. I saw you that night with that man. I saw what you're capable of. Pain flashed across Luca's features, quick and raw before he masked it. Everything I've done has been to protect what's mine. And what am I? Mia's voice broke. Just another thing to possess? Another piece in your war? Luca moved toward her, his hand reaching out, but Mia stepped back. The hurt in his eyes looked real, but how could she trust anything about him now? You're different, he said softly. You've always been different. Mia laughed bitterly. Different enough that you'd stop this vendetta against my father? Different enough that you'd walk away from all of this? The silence that followed was answer enough. Luca's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. They both knew the truth. He was too deep in this life to ever truly leave it behind. I should go, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. You need time to process this. Time? Mia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. Time won't change what you are, Luca. It won't change what you've done. He moved past her, his shoulder barely brushing hers, but even that slight contact sent electricity through her body. At the door, he paused, looking back at her one last time. The weight of everything unsaid hung between them. The attraction, the connection, the possibility of what could have been in another life. Then he was gone, leaving Mia alone with the shattered pieces of her heart and the bitter taste of truth on her tongue. She stared at the empty doorway, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The naive girl who'd gotten into a stranger's car on a snowy night was gone, replaced by someone who understood just how dangerous love could be. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked window of Anna's apartment. Mia pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching droplets chase each other down the pane. 3 days had passed since she'd discovered Luca's true identity, and each minute felt like an eternity. You need to eat something, Anna said from behind her, concern evident in her voice. The smell of pasta wafted through the small space, but Mia's stomach turned at the thought of food. I'm not hungry, she mumbled, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. Her phone sat silent on the coffee table, dark and accusatory. She'd turned off all notifications, but that didn't stop her from checking it every few minutes. Part of her wanted to hear from him, while another part dreaded the possibility. Across town, in his sprawling mansion, Luca DeMarco stood at his own window, watching the same rain fall. His usually immaculate office was in disarray, papers scattered across his desk, an empty whiskey glass overturned. The weight of sleepless nights showed in the dark circles under his eyes. Boss, his right-hand man, Marco, appeared in the doorway. The Moretti situation. Not now, Luca cut him off, his voice sharp enough to make Marco step back. Left alone again, Luca ran a hand through his disheveled hair. The empire he'd built, the power he'd accumulated, it all felt hollow without her. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hurt in Mia's face, the betrayal that had shattered something beautiful between them. Back at Anna's apartment, Mia finally pulled herself away from the window. She'd spent days analyzing every moment, every conversation with Luca. Had there been signs she missed? Was every gentle touch, every protective gesture just part of his plan? He's dangerous, Mia, Anna said softly, setting down a cup of tea. Men like him, they don't change. You don't know him, Mia replied automatically, then caught herself. Did she know him? The real him? In his mansion, Luca paced the length of his office for the 100th time. The family portrait on his wall, his father, stern and unforgiving, seemed to judge his every step. The DeMarco legacy weighed heavy on his shoulders, generations of power and violence that had shaped him into who he was. But Mia had seen something else in him, something he'd thought long buried under years of necessary cruelty. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he scrolled through their text messages. Simple conversations about favorite movies, jokes about bad coffee at the hotel. Moments of normalcy he'd never thought possible in his world. Mia's fingers traced the rim of her teacup, remembering how Luca's hands had felt on her skin that night he'd protected her. The violence had been terrifying, yes, but the gentleness afterward, the way he'd checked her for injuries, the softness in his eyes, that had been real. Hadn't it? The rain continued to fall, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of their hearts. In different parts of the city, they both stood at a crossroads. Mia, torn between her fear and her feelings. Luca, between his duty and his heart. Finally, Luca made his decision. The phone trembled slightly in his hand as he dialed her number. Each ring felt like an eternity until... "Mia," he breathed when she answered. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you." There was silence on the other end, but he could hear her breathing. "I'll do anything," he continued, his voice raw with emotion. "Anything to keep you safe, to prove to you that what we had, what we could have, it's real." Mia's heart thundered in her chest. "How can I trust you?" she whispered. "Meet me," he said. "Just once. Let me explain everything. After that, if you want to walk away, I won't stop you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Finally, Mia took a deep breath. "Okay," she said softly. "Where?" The park was deserted at this hour, streetlights casting long shadows across the damp grass. Mia pulled her coat tighter around herself as she walked toward the familiar silhouette waiting by the fountain. Luca stood perfectly still, his presence commanding even in the growing darkness. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to pause. Luca's usually stern expression softened slightly at the sight of her, but the tension in his shoulders remained. He wore a black suit that made him look every bit the dangerous man she now knew him to be. "You came," he said softly, his voice carrying across the empty space between them. Mia stopped a few feet away, maintaining a safe distance. "I need answers, Luca. Real ones this time." He nodded, running a hand through his dark hair, a rare display of uncertainty from someone who usually exuded nothing but control. "It's complicated, Mia. More than you know." "Then explain it to me," she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. Luca's jaw tightened as he gathered his thoughts. 7 years ago, I was young, reckless. I made a mistake during a drug deal that should have cost me my life. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Your father was there that night. He didn't know me then, but he stepped in. When things went wrong, he saved my life." Mia's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "The debt I owed him. It complicated everything. When our family's territories started overlapping, when the violence began." Luca's fists clenched at his sides. "I've been trying to balance that debt with my family's demands for years." The weight of his words settled over them like a heavy blanket. Mia's mind raced, trying to process this new information. Her father, the man who had kept her sheltered from his world, had saved the life of the man she was falling for. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could I?" Luca took a step closer, and Mia fought the urge to back away. The moment I realized who you were, everything became impossible. I wanted to keep you away from all of this, but I couldn't stay away from you." The raw honesty in his voice made her heart ache. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between duty and desire that had been tearing him apart. "The night with the thug," she said slowly, "you weren't just protecting me because of who I am to my father, were you?" Luca's expression darkened. "I protected you because the thought of anyone hurting you makes me want to burn the world down." He moved closer, and this time Mia didn't retreat. "Everything I've done since meeting you has been about keeping you safe, even from myself." The intensity in his eyes made her shiver. Here was a man who commanded respect through fear, who had built his empire on violence and power, looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. "I don't know how to trust this," Mia admitted, gesturing between them. "Everything I thought I knew about you, about my father, about this whole situation, it's all twisted up now." "Let me protect you," Luca pleaded, reaching for her hand. His touch sent electricity through her skin. "Trust me to keep you safe, to figure this out. We can find a way through this together." Mia looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. The pull between them was magnetic, undeniable. But the weight of their family's history, the violence that surrounded him, the lies that had brought them here, it was too much. Slowly she pulled her hand away. "I can't," she whispered, tears threatening to fall. "Not yet. Not when I don't even know what's real anymore." She turned away from him, each step feeling like lead. Behind her she could feel Luca's presence, his silence heavier than any words could be. She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the park, both of their hearts breaking under the weight of impossible choices. Mia sat in her small apartment, surrounded by newspaper clippings and old photos spread across her coffee table. Her hands trembled as she picked up another article about a violent clash between rival families 7 years ago. The details were vague, but the implications were clear. Something big had happened that night. Something that changed everything. She pulled out her laptop and typed in her father's name, scrolling through countless articles. Most were about business dealings, charity events, and the occasional scandal. But nothing about that night Luca mentioned. Her father had always been careful about keeping his real business out of the papers. Her phone buzzed, a text from her childhood friend Maria, who worked at her father's company. "Found something interesting in the old files. Meeting in 20?" The cafe was quiet when Mia arrived. Maria sat in a corner booth, a manila envelope in front of her. "You won't believe what I found," she whispered, sliding the envelope across the table. Inside were photos from a warehouse, grainy security camera stills. Mia's breath caught as she recognized her father's younger face, and there, barely visible in the shadows, was Luca. Blood stained his shirt, and her father's hand was on his shoulder, guiding him away from what looked like bodies on the ground. "There's more," Maria said, pulling out a handwritten letter. "This was in your father's personal safe. It's from Luca, dated a week after that night." Mia's hands shook as she read, "Mr. Moretti, I owe you my life. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm yours. Luca DeMarco." "My father kept this all these years," Mia whispered. "Why?" "Maybe as insurance?" Maria suggested. "Or maybe he actually cared about saving Luca that night." Mia spent the next few hours digging deeper. She called old family friends, pretending to work on a family history project. Each conversation revealed new pieces of the puzzle. Her father had been different back then, less hardened. The violence between the families hadn't started until years after that night, when territories began to overlap. As evening fell, Mia drove to her father's estate, her mind racing with questions. The security guards let her through without hesitation. She was still the boss's daughter, after all. She found him in his study, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Mia, what brings you here so late?" "The warehouse," she said without preamble. 7 years ago, with Luca DeMarco. Her father's expression hardened. He removed his glasses slowly, deliberately. "You've been digging. Why didn't you tell me? All these years of keeping me away from the business, away from the violence, but you saved his life that night. Why?" "It was business," he said coldly. "Nothing more." "That's not true," Mia challenged, pulling out the letter. "You kept this. You saved it all these years." Her father's eyes flashed with anger. "What I did that night was a mistake. I showed mercy when I should have let nature take its course. Look what it's brought us. Territory wars, dead soldiers, and now my own daughter falling for the enemy." "He's not the enemy," Mia's voice rose. "You made him that way. You saved his life, earned his loyalty, and then what? Turned on him when it was convenient?" "Convenient?" Her father stood, his voice thunderous. "Nothing about this life is convenient, Mia. I kept you away from all this to protect you. And now here you are, defending a man who would destroy everything we've built." "No," Mia said quietly, her heart breaking. "You're the one destroying everything, with your cold calculations and your endless wars. I thought maybe there was more to the story, that maybe you had a heart underneath all this, but you're just empty." Her father's face was stone. "If that's what you choose to believe, so be it. But remember where your loyalties should lie." "My loyalties?" Mia laughed bitterly. "You lost those the moment you chose power over humanity. I'm done with all of this." She turned to leave, her father's voice following her. "You walk away now. You're choosing him over family." Mia paused at the door, her heart heavy. "No, father. I'm choosing myself." The evening air was thick with tension as Mia's car pulled up to Luca's mansion. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, but her resolve was firm. Security guards flanked the entrance, their faces stoic as they recognized her. One spoke quietly into his earpiece, and moments later, the massive doors swung open. Luca stood in the marble foyer, his dark suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I've been lying to myself," Mia replied, stepping closer. The space between them crackled with electricity. "About you, about my father, about everything." He gestured toward his study, and she followed him into the warmly lit room. Crystal decanters caught the light from a fireplace, casting amber shadows on the walls. Luca poured them both a drink, his movements precise and measured. "I found out about that night," Mia said, accepting the glass. "The warehouse, when my father saved you." Luca's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. "But it changed everything, didn't it?" She moved closer, watching his face. "You offered him loyalty, and he threw it back in your face." "Your father—" Luca paused, choosing his words carefully. "He's not the same man who saved me that night. Power changes people, makes them forget who they used to be." Mia sank into a leather armchair, the weight of truth settling over her. "He's getting worse. More paranoid, more violent. The man I knew growing up, he's gone." Luca leaned against his desk, studying her. "What are you suggesting?" "An alliance," she said firmly. "You know the business better than anyone. You have the connections, the power. And She took a deep breath. "I have access to his inner circle. Together we might be able to stop him before he destroys everything." "It's dangerous," Luca warned. "If he discovers what we're planning. I know the risks." Mia stood, closing the distance between them. But I also know that what I feel for you is real. And watching my father spiral into madness while pretending everything is fine, I can't do it anymore. Luca's hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone so dangerous. You understand what you're asking? Once we start this, there's no going back. I understand, she whispered. The warmth of his hand against her cheek made her heart race. But I trust you. Despite everything, despite who you are and what you do, I trust you. His eyes darkened with emotion. I'll protect you, he vowed, his voice rough. No matter what happens, no matter how this ends, I'll keep you safe. I know, she said, and she meant it. Whatever darkness lay in Luca's past, whatever violence he was capable of, she knew with absolute certainty that he would never hurt her. They spent the next hour outlining their plan. Mia would maintain her relationship with her father, gathering information while appearing to distance herself from Luca. Meanwhile, Luca would work on consolidating power, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. We'll need to be careful, Luca said, spreading out maps of his territory. Your father has eyes everywhere. One wrong move. I can handle it, Mia assured him. I've been playing the dutiful daughter my whole life. He won't suspect anything. As they worked, the tension between them shifted from uncertainty to something deeper, more intimate. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, reinforced the connection they couldn't deny. Finally, Luca rolled up the maps and turned to her. Are you absolutely sure about this? Once we start, I'm sure, she said firmly. Whatever happens, we face it together. He nodded, his expression intense. Together then. But remember, at the first sign of real danger, you get out. Your safety comes first. Mia stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. Through his shirt, she could feel his heart beating steady and strong. Our safety, she corrected. Both of us. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Luca's study windows as their allies filed out of the room. The meeting had been tense, filled with carefully chosen words and veiled threats disguised as promises. Now, only Mia and Luca remained, the weight of their decisions hanging heavy in the air. Mia leaned against his desk, exhausted from hours of strategic planning. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, and Luca couldn't help but notice how the sunlight caught the curves of her face. She looked up, catching his gaze. That went better than expected, she said softly, but her voice trembled slightly. Luca moved closer, his presence commanding the space between them. They'll fall in line. They know better than to cross me. And what about us? Mia asked, her eyes searching his face. Where do we stand in all of this? The question hung between them, charged with weeks of unspoken desire. Luca's jaw tightened as he stepped even closer, until barely inches separated them. The scent of her, perfume, subtle and sweet, filled his senses. You know where we stand, he said, his voice rough with restraint. His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into his touch. Do I? Her breath hitched as his fingers trailed down her cheek. Because sometimes I think I understand, and then other times... Luca cut her off, closing the distance between them. His lips found hers with an intensity that had been building since that first night on the snowy road. The kiss was everything they'd been holding back. Fierce, desperate, and filled with need. Mia's hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer as his arms wrapped around her waist. The world narrowed to just this moment. The taste of her lips, the soft sound she made as he deepened the kiss, the way her body fit perfectly against his. All the danger, all the complications of their situation faded away until there was only this, Only them. Luca's control, usually ironclad, began to slip. One hand tangled in her hair, while the other pressed against the small of her back, holding her close. Mia responded with equal passion, her fingers sliding up to his neck, sending shivers down his spine. The kiss became more desperate, more demanding. Luca backed her against the desk, lifting her slightly so she sat on its edge. Mia's legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him closer. The heat between them was overwhelming, years of tension finally breaking free. But reality couldn't be held at bay forever. The sound of footsteps in the hallway brought Luca back to his senses. He pulled away, his breathing ragged, his hands still gripping her waist. Mia's lips were swollen from his kisses, her eyes dark with desire and uncertainty. "We shouldn't," he said, even as everything in him screamed to pull her back into his arms. "Why not?" Mia's voice was barely above a whisper, her hand still resting on his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palm. "Because," Luca stepped back, creating space between them, though it felt like physical pain. "I can't protect you if I lose control, and with you." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "With you, I lose all control." Mia slid off the desk, her legs unsteady. The kiss had left her breathless, confused, and wanting more. She could still feel the pressure of his lips, the strength of his arms around her. But she also saw the conflict in his eyes, the same fear that echoed in her own heart. They stood there, the space between them electric with unresolved tension. Everything had changed with that kiss, and yet nothing had been resolved. The danger still lurked outside these walls, waiting to tear them apart. But now they both knew exactly what they stood to lose. The morning sun hadn't yet touched the horizon when Luca's phone buzzed. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert. One glance at the screen made his blood run cold. The message contained a single photo, Mia leaving her friend's apartment yesterday, a red laser dot visible on her back. He was out of bed and moving before his mind could fully process the implications. His fingers flew across the phone, sending rapid-fire orders to his security team. Within minutes, his entire network was mobilizing. Mia answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Luca, what's wrong?" "Pack a bag, now. I'm sending Marco to get you." His tone left no room for argument. "Don't leave his sight. I mean it, Mia." The silence on her end told him she understood the gravity of the situation. "Is it my father?" "We'll talk when you're safe." He ended the call and strode to his weapons room, punching in the security code with practiced efficiency. As he armed himself, his mind was already mapping out contingencies, identifying weak points in his defense, calculating risks. Within an hour, Mia arrived at his compound, escorted by his most trusted lieutenant. Her face was pale but composed, though her hands trembled slightly as she set down her bag. Luca pulled her into his arms, inhaling her scent, allowing himself this one moment of relief before facing what was coming. "Show me," she demanded, pulling back to look at him. He hesitated, then handed her his phone. She studied the photo, her jaw tightening. "They were watching me. They're trying to draw me out." Luca's voice was cold, controlled, but rage simmered beneath the surface. "Your father's allies are making their move. They think threatening you will make me vulnerable." "Will it?" Her eyes met his, searching. Instead of answering, he led her to his office where maps and surveillance photos covered his desk. "We've identified 3 main groups working with your father. They're coordinating, planning something big." His fingers traced routes on the map. "The Rossis control the docks. The Calabresi family has the warehouse district, and the Vitales." He tapped a location in the city center. "They're the ones who sent the warning." Mia leaned over the desk, studying the information. The Vitales were always the most aggressive. My father used them for his dirty work. They're also the weakest link. Luca's expression darkened. Taking them out first will send a message to the others. You're going to kill them. It wasn't a question. They threatened what's mine. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Nobody threatens you and lives. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. Another message, this time a video. Mia's father appeared on screen, his familiar face twisted with contempt. You've corrupted my daughter, DeMarco. Now you'll watch everything you love burn. Luca's hand clenched around the phone. In one fluid motion, he drew his gun, checked the magazine. Marco, he called out, and his lieutenant appeared instantly. Get the cars ready. Alert everyone. We move tonight. Luca. Mia's voice was soft, but he heard the fear in it. He turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. I won't let them hurt you. But this ends now. Your father, the Vitales, all of them, they've made their choice. She nodded, understanding the implications. This was his world. The violence she'd tried to escape, now wrapped around her like a steel trap. But as she looked at Luca, saw the deadly determination in his eyes, she realized she'd already chosen her side. What do you need me to do? She asked. His expression softened for a moment, and he pressed a kiss to her forehead. Stay close. Trust no one but me and Marco. This will get ugly before it's over. Around them, the compound came alive with activity. Men armed themselves. Vehicles were prepared. Plans were set in motion. Luca's empire was awakening, preparing for war, all because someone had dared to threaten her. Mia watched it unfold, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like belonging. She was part of this now, bound to Luca and his world of shadows and violence. There was no turning back, no safe harbor to retreat to. Her father had made sure of that. Luca leaned back in his leather chair, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like a physical force. The amber liquid in his glass caught the dim light as he swirled it, watching the shadows dance across his desk. Papers were scattered before him. Surveillance reports, financial records, everything he needed to destroy Mia's father. But his mind kept drifting to her face, to the way she looked at him with both fear and trust. His phone buzzed, another update from his men watching the Vitale compound. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening. They were moving weapons, preparing for something big. Time was running out. Boss? Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. The Calabrese family is mobilizing too. They're calling in favors. Luca set down his glass with deliberate care. And Mia's father? Still in his compound. But there's been unusual activity. Cars coming and going all night. The words hung in the air like smoke. Luca stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. His city. The lights twinkled below, peaceful from this distance, hiding the violence brewing in the shadows. Everything he'd built, everything he'd fought for, was at risk. And for what? A woman? His father would have called him weak. But Mia wasn't just any woman. She was fire and steel wrapped in silk, strong enough to stand beside him, yet vulnerable enough to need his protection. She made him want things he'd never allowed himself to want before. Get me everything on the Vitale's security detail, he ordered, not turning around. Every guard, every rotation, every weakness. Already done. Marco placed a file on his desk. But boss, there's something else. Luca turned, noting the hesitation in his lieutenant's voice. Our inside man at the precinct says Mia's father has been meeting with federal agents. He's planning to turn informant. The news hit Luca like a physical blow. If Mia's father flipped, It wouldn't just mean the end of his empire. It would mean prison, separation from Mia. Everything he'd built would crumble. He moved back to his desk, spreading out the maps again. His fingers traced the territories, the borders between families that had been drawn in blood. He'd spent years maintaining these delicate balances, playing the game of power and control. But now... Sir? Marco was still waiting. Get everyone in position, Luca said finally. I want eyes on every major player. If anyone so much as sneezes, I want to know about it. As Marco left, Luca pulled out his phone, looking at the last message from Mia. A simple, "Be safe," that carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. He thought of her sleeping upstairs, trusting him to keep her protected while her own father plotted against them both. The choice crystallized in his mind, clear as cut diamond. He couldn't keep straddling these worlds, trying to balance his duty to his family with his growing feelings for Mia. The game had changed. The stakes were too high. Luca stood, his decision made. He would take it all, every territory, every alliance, every scrap of power. Not just for survival now, but for her, for them. He would reshape this entire underworld until it bent to his will, until there was no question of loyalty or choice. He pressed the intercom. Marco, call everyone in. Full meeting in an hour. It was time to stop playing defense. Time to show everyone why he was feared, why his name made hardened men tremble. He would build something new from the ashes of the old world, something that could protect both his power and his love for Mia. No more hiding in shadows. No more careful maneuvering. He would claim what was his, all of it, and heaven help anyone who stood in his way. The warehouse air hung thick with tension as Mia stood frozen between the two most important men in her life. Her father, Antonio Moretti, faced off against Luca, both men radiating deadly calm. The stark fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across their faces, making them look like creatures from her darkest nightmares. You really thought you could take her from me? Antonio's voice carried across the empty space. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his eyes wild with rage and betrayal. My own daughter? Luca remained still, his hand hovering near his weapon. She chose to leave, Antonio. You pushed her away with your lies. Mia's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the scene unfold. Armed men lined the walls, some loyal to her father, others to Luca. The weight of their guns pointed at each other made the air feel electric with potential violence. Lies? Antonio laughed, but there was no humor in it. I protected her. Everything I did was to keep her safe from men like you, DeMarco. Safe? Luca's voice turned dangerous, low. Is that what you call sending thugs to intimidate her, having her followed, threatening her friends? Mia's aunt stepped forward, her voice shaking. Dad, please, this has to stop. But Antonio's eyes had turned cold, the father she knew disappearing behind the mask of a Mafia boss. You don't understand what he is, what he's capable of. I saved his life once, and how does he repay me? By stealing my daughter. I'm not your property, Mia's shout echoed through the warehouse. I made my choice. The first shot came without warning. One of Antonio's men, trigger-happy and nervous, fired at Luca. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Luca moved with lethal grace, shoving Mia behind a concrete pillar as gunfire filled the air. She pressed her hands over her ears, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Through gaps in the concrete, she watched the violent dance unfold. Luca was beautiful in his brutality. He moved like a predator, each shot precise, each movement calculated. But what terrified her most was the look in his eyes. Cold, merciless, yet somehow still protective when they flickered to her hiding spot. Antonio's men fell one by one. The sound of gunfire gave way to screams, then to an eerie silence broken only by footsteps and groaning. "It's over, Antonio." Luca's voice cut through the quiet. "Surrender now." Mia peered around the pillar. Her father stood alone, his gun trained on Luca, his men either dead or subdued around him. Blood stained the concrete floor, turning the dust to mud. "You think I'll let you win?" Antonio's hand shook. "After everything?" "Dad, please." Mia stepped out, ignoring Luca's warning growl. "Don't make this worse." "Worse?" Antonio's laugh was hollow. "I built an empire to protect you and you throw it away for him?" "I never wanted an empire." Mia's voice cracked. "I just wanted a father." The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Then Antonio moved, his gun swinging toward Mia. Luca's reaction was instantaneous. 2 shots rang out, and Antonio crumpled. Mia screamed, running to her father's side. Blood bloomed across his chest, his breathing ragged. His eyes found hers, filled with a mixture of anger and regret. "I did everything for you," he whispered before his eyes glazed over. Luca's men moved efficiently, securing the scene, but Mia remained kneeling in her father's blood. She felt Luca's presence behind her, solid and warm, but couldn't bring herself to look at him. The warehouse lights flickered, casting alternating shadows and harsh light across the scene of carnage. Mia's world had shifted on its axis, leaving her dizzy and ungrounded. The girl who had once lived in ignorant bliss was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who understood the true cost of love in their violent world. Luca's hand found her shoulder, gentle despite the violence he'd just unleashed. She leaned into his touch, seeking comfort even as her father's blood cooled on the concrete beside her. The future stretched before them, uncertain and dangerous, but she couldn't deny the pull that bound her to this dangerous man even now. The hotel suite felt too small for the weight of their emotions. Mia stood by the window, watching the city lights blur through her tears. Behind her, Luca's presence filled the room like a storm about to break. "You lied to me from the beginning," she said, her voice hollow. The memory of her father's blood on her hands made her stomach turn. "Everything was calculated, wasn't it?" Luca stepped closer, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't touch me right now. I never meant to hurt you, Mia." His voice was rough with emotion. "From the moment I found out who you were, I tried to keep my distance, but I couldn't stay away." She turned to face him, anger flaring. "And that makes it okay? You knew who I was when you helped me that night. You knew exactly what would happen." "I knew I had to protect you." His jaw clenched. "Your father was losing control. His enemies were closing in. It was only a matter of time before..." "Before what? Before you killed him?" The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "He was my father, Luca. Despite everything, he was still my father." Luca's eyes darkened with pain. "He would have killed you, Mia, when he raised that gun." He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "I made a choice. I'll always choose you." Mia wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces that threatened to shatter. "I can't do this. I can't live in this world of violence and death. Every time I close my eyes, I see him falling. I see the blood." "This is who I am," Luca said softly. "This world, it's part of me. But with you, I'm more than just violence. You make me want to be better." "Better?" She laughed bitterly. "How many more people will die because of us? How many more families will be torn apart? I'll burn down the whole world to keep you safe." His intensity made her shiver. "Don't ask me to apologize for that." Mia moved towards the door, grabbing her bag. "I need to leave. I can't I can't breathe here. Luca moved faster than she expected, his hand catching her wrist. The touch sent electricity through her skin, despite everything. Don't run from me, Mia. Please. She tried to pull away, but his grip was gentle, yet unyielding. Let me go, Luca. I can't. His voice broke slightly. I've tried. God knows I've tried to let you go, but I can't. You're in my blood now. Tears spilled down her cheeks. We're toxic together. Can't you see that? Everything we touch turns to ash. He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. Or maybe everything we touch turns to fire. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Luca. Her resistance was crumbling under the weight of his touch, his presence. Stay, he whispered, his thumb brushing away her tears. Stay with me. Let me show you that there can be more than just violence. Let me prove that what we have is worth fighting for. Mia's heart thundered in her chest. Every logical part of her screamed to run, to escape before she drowned in the darkness of his world. But her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch, seeking the comfort only he could provide. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of what loving you means, scared of what I'm becoming. His arms wrapped around her, strong and secure. Then let me be strong enough for both of us. Let me protect you, even from yourself. The bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Mia pressed her forehead against his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of him. Expensive cologne mixed with something darker, dangerous. Her hands fisted in his shirt, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. Promise me, she whispered. Promise me there's more than just death and violence in our future. Luca stood in his office, staring at the city lights below. The whiskey in his glass remained untouched. His world had shifted the moment Mia walked away, and now everything else seemed meaningless. Power, territory, respect, none of it mattered without her. His phone buzzed. Another threat from her father's old allies. They thought they could use this moment of weakness against him. They were wrong. Get me Vincent, he commanded into his phone. His second-in-command answered immediately. Boss? I want every piece of intel we have on the Moretti Alliance. Every rat, every weak link, every dirty secret. His voice was cold steel. It ends tonight. Within hours, his men had gathered in the war room. Maps and photos covered the walls. Faces of men who thought they could keep Mia away from him. Men who believed their old agreements with her father still held weight. Their security is concentrated here and here. Vincent pointed to the map, but they're stretched thin after the last clash. Luca's fingers traced the locations. They expect me to honor the old boundaries, to play by their rules. A dangerous smile curved his lips. They don't understand. There are no rules anymore. He moved with calculated precision, dispatching teams to strategic locations. One by one, the pieces fell into place. The first strike hit the Moretti's main warehouse, a message written in flames and gunfire. The second target was their money laundering operation, destroyed before dawn. By midnight, his phone was ringing constantly. Old family heads demanding explanations, offering deals, trying to maintain the status quo. Luca ignored them all. He had only one goal now. In his office, he poured another drink, remembering Mia's tears, her anger, her pain. He'd let the old ways, the ancient feuds, keep them apart. No more. Sir, Vincent appeared at the door. They're asking for a meeting, all of them. Luca straightened his tie. Good. The meeting was held in neutral territory, an old church converted into a restaurant. 5 family heads sat around the table, their faces grave. They'd expected to find a man willing to negotiate. Instead, they found a predator. This ends now, Luca's voice cut, through their protests. The old alliances are dead. Your hold over the Moretti territory, over Mia, it's over. You're breaking decades of peace, one of them warned. All for a woman? Luca's laugh was cold. Peace? You call what you did to her father peace? The way you manipulated him, pushed him until he snapped? He leaned forward. I'm not breaking the peace. I'm ending a war that should have ended years ago. The meeting lasted less than an hour. When Luca walked out, the old order had crumbled. He'd given them a choice, step aside or be destroyed. They'd chosen survival. He drove to Mia's apartment, his heart pounding with each step up to her door. When she opened it, her eyes were red from crying, but she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "Being who I should have been from the start." He stepped closer. A man who fights for what he wants, not what others expect him to be. "Luca." She shook her head, but didn't back away. "I destroyed them all," he said softly. "Every agreement, every chain that bound me to their world. I'm free now, free to choose you." Her breath caught. "You can't just—" "I can. I did." He reached for her hand, relief flooding him when she didn't pull away. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to let me prove that our love is stronger than their hatred." Mia's eyes searched his face, seeing the change in him. The man before her wasn't bound by old loyalties or ancient feuds. He was transformed by love. Dangerous still, but with a purpose that centered solely on her. Her fingers tightened around his. "You did all this for me?" "I'd do anything for you," he said simply. "You claimed my heart the moment I saw you on that snowy road. Everything since then has just been me catching up to that truth." The morning sun filtered through the grand windows of Luca's mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Mia stood beside him, her hand clasped firmly in his as they faced the assembled capos and lieutenants. The room hummed with tension. These men had served under the old regime, and now they watched their new leader with careful, calculating eyes. "Things will be different now," Luca's voice carried across the room, commanding attention. His thumb traced gentle circles on Mia's hand, a private gesture of comfort amid the public display of power. "The woman beside me isn't just my partner. She's your future Donna. Anyone who has a problem with that won't live long enough to voice their complaints." Mia felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but she held her head high. She'd learned to wear this new role like armor, to let their stares slide off her like water. Luca's presence beside her was both a shield and a sword. "The territory lines have been redrawn," Luca continued. "The old alliances are dead. We build something new from here." His grip on Mia's hand tightened slightly. "Something stronger." The men nodded, some more eagerly than others. They'd witnessed Luca's ruthless dismantling of the old guard. None wanted to test his resolve now. Later, in the privacy of Luca's office, Mia watched him work. He moved with the same lethal grace she'd first noticed that snowy night. But now she understood the complexity beneath his dangerous exterior. He wasn't just the cold-blooded killer the world saw. He was a man who'd torn apart an empire to protect her. "You're staring," he said without looking up from his papers. "I'm thinking," she corrected, moving to perch on the edge of his desk. "About how different everything is now." Luca set down his pen, giving her his full attention. His eyes softened in the way they only did for her. "Do you regret it?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I thought I would. All this violence, this power." She gestured to the world around them. "I spent so long running from it. But with you—" She traced her fingers along his jaw, feeling the slight stubble there. "With you, it feels right." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the gun holstered at his side. "I'll burn this whole city down if anyone tries to take you from me." "I know." And she did know. She'd seen his capacity for violence, witnessed the destruction he could unleash. But she'd also felt the gentleness in his touch, the way he held her like she was precious. "That's why I'm not afraid anymore." Luca stood, pulling her against his chest. His heartbeat was steady under her ear, a rhythm she'd come to associate with safety. "You're mine," he murmured into her hair. "My queen, my heart, my everything." The words sent a shiver down her spine. This was the man who'd claimed her soul that first night, dangerous and protective, violent and tender. She'd fought against falling for him, against accepting this life. Now she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "The men will follow you," he said, his voice taking on the edge that meant business. "But some might need convincing. Are you ready for that?" Mia pulled back enough to meet his gaze. "I was born into this world, remember? I might have tried to escape it, but I never forgot its rules." Her lips curved into a smile that matched his own dangerous one. "Besides, I learned from the best." His laugh was dark and pleased. "That's my girl." His hands tightened possessively on her waist. "We'll build something new together, something that will last." Looking up at him, Mia saw their future stretched out before them, filled with danger and passion, power and protection. She'd chosen this life, chosen him, with her eyes wide open. The darkness didn't frighten her anymore, not when Luca's love burned brighter than any shadow. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Luca's office, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Mia watched as Luca stood at his desk, his fingers trailing over reports of the night's activities. The last pockets of resistance had been crushed, their territories absorbed, their soldiers either eliminated or brought to heel. "Everything secured?" Mia asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd been there for most of it, watching as Luca systematically dismantled every threat to their future. "The last holdout fell an hour ago." Luca's voice carried the weight of certainty. He looked up at her, his dark eyes holding that mix of danger and devotion that still made her heart race. "No one will challenge us now." Mia moved to stand beside him, her fingers intertwining with his. The reports before them told a story of blood and power, territory maps redrawn, alliances reformed, enemies eliminated. It should have frightened her, this evidence of their violent ascension. Instead, she felt only certainty. "Your father's old captains?" she asked, though she could see their names listed among the casualties. "They made their choice." Luca's grip tightened slightly on her hand. "They chose poorly." The memory of the past week's violence flickered through her mind. The gunfire, the screams, the way Luca had moved through it all like an avenging angel, deadly and beautiful. She'd watched him take down men twice his size, had seen him negotiate surrenders with the same cold efficiency he used to order executions. But she'd also seen how he looked at her in the quiet moments between battles, how his hands gentled when they touched her, how his voice softened when they were alone. The duality of him no longer confused her. It was simply who he was, who they both were now. "The other families are falling in line," Luca continued, gesturing to another report. "They've seen what happens to those who resist. We'll have peace now, at least for a while." Mia moved to the window, looking out over the city that was now truly theirs. The skyline stretched before her, beautiful and terrible in its possibility. "And what do we do with peace?" Luca came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. His presence was solid, grounding, a reminder of everything they'd fought for. We build. We strengthen what we've taken. We make sure no one ever threatens what's ours again. She leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her spine. I used to think I wanted normal, she admitted. A quiet life, away from all this. And now? His breath was warm against her neck. Now I know better. She turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. Normal was never our destiny. This is who we are. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with careful tenderness. It was the same hand that had pulled triggers and signed death warrants. Yet with her, it was always gentle. You're stronger than I ever imagined, he murmured, watching you these past days. You were made for this life. She had surprised herself, too, finding strength she never knew she possessed. When the fighting had started, she'd expected to feel torn, conflicted. Instead, she'd found clarity. Every decision, every action had been for them, for their future. We both are, she replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. Made for each other, made for this. Around them, the city was waking up to its new reality. Phones were ringing in other rooms as reports came in, confirmations of their complete control. But here, in this moment, it was just them, the king and queen of their bloody empire, stronger together than they'd ever been apart. Luca's eyes darkened as he looked at her, filled with pride and possession, and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. Together, he agreed, the word a promise and a prayer. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Luca's office, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Mia stood at the window, watching the city below come to life. The skyline that had once seemed so imposing now felt like home. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized, poised, confident, powerful. Gone was the scared girl stranded on a snowy road all those months ago. Behind her, Luca worked at his desk, the quiet scratch of his pen signing documents that would cement their control over the territory. The sound was oddly comforting now, like the ticking of a clock or the beating of a heart. She watched his reflection in the window, admiring the way his shoulders moved beneath his tailored suit, the focused set of his jaw. The Castellano family signed the agreement, he said without looking up. Their territory is officially ours. Mia turned from the window, crossing the room to perch on the edge of his desk. That's the last of them, isn't it? Yes. He set down his pen, looking up at her with those dark eyes that still made her heart skip. Everything from the river to the coast belongs to us now. The word us sent a shiver down her spine. She remembered a time when she would have run from this, from the violence, the power, the responsibility. Now she embraced it, found strength in it. In him. I never thought I'd be here, she admitted, reaching out to trace the line of his jaw. Standing beside you, helping build this empire. Luca caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the brutal efficiency she'd witnessed just days ago, when he'd eliminated their last major threat. That duality no longer frightened her. It was part of who he was, who they both were now. You've always been stronger than you knew, he said, his voice low and intense. I saw it that first night, even when you were trying to hide from it. The memory of their first meeting flooded back. The cold night, the broken-down car, the mysterious stranger who'd offered her a ride. She'd been terrified then, but something in her had recognized something in him. A connection that defied explanation. I was so naive, she said, shaking her head. I thought I could keep my distance, stay out of this world. Luca stood, pulling her against him, The solid warmth of his body grounded her, as it always did. And now? Now I know better. She pressed closer, breathing in his familiar scent. This world, your world, it's part of me now. I wouldn't change that even if I could. His hands tightened on her waist, possessive yet gentle. You've changed everything, he murmured against her hair. The way I think, the way I lead, the way I fight. Everything I do now, I do with you in mind. The words touched something deep inside her, a place that had been transformed by their love. She thought about how far they'd come, the betrayals they'd overcome, the battles they'd fought, the trust they'd built. Each challenge had only made them stronger, more determined to protect what they'd found in each other. I used to be afraid of the darkness in you, she confessed, looking up into his eyes. Now I understand it. The things we do, the choices we make, they're all for us, for our future. Luca's expression softened, though the intensity in his gaze remained. You're the only one who's ever seen all of me, he said, the monster and the man. And you're the only one who's ever made me feel like I could be both without destroying myself. The truth of his words resonated through her. She had changed, too, grown into someone who could stand beside him, match his strength with her own. The innocence she'd once clung to had been replaced by something deeper, more powerful, a love that could weather violence and darkness without losing its light. I love you, she whispered, the words carrying the weight of everything they'd become together. All of you. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Mia stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her designer dress, a far cry from the worn jeans she'd been wearing the night her car broke down. The woman who stared back at her exuded confidence and power, someone who commanded respect in both legitimate business circles and the underworld. Luca emerged from their bedroom, his presence filling the space as it always did. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, but his eyes softened when they met hers in the mirror. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her neck. "Ready for the meeting?" he asked, his breath warm against her skin. "The real estate developers won't know what hit them," she replied with a smile that matched his own dangerous one. They'd been expanding their legitimate businesses, building an empire that could withstand scrutiny while maintaining their hold on the darker side of the city. Their driver waited downstairs with the armored SUV. 2 guards flanked them as they made their way through the lobby, their presence both protection and a statement of power. The city was theirs now, every street corner and high-rise a piece of their shared kingdom. In the car, Luca reviewed documents on his tablet while Mia checked their schedule. They worked in comfortable silence, years of partnership having taught them the rhythm of each other's thoughts. His hand rested on her knee, a casual gesture that spoke volumes about their connection. "The construction on the waterfront is ahead of schedule," Mia noted, scrolling through reports, "and the charity gala next week is fully booked." Luca nodded, pride evident in his expression. "You've transformed our public image. No one questions our legitimacy anymore." "It helps that we actually are legitimate," she said with a knowing smile. "At least on paper." They'd built their empire carefully, layer by layer. Clean businesses on top, carefully managed operations underneath. It was a delicate balance, but they maintained it together. Mia handled the public face of their organization, while Luca managed the shadows. Each complemented the other perfectly. The car pulled up to their first meeting of the day. As they stepped out, heads turned. They always did. They commanded attention without trying, their power evident in every movement. Mia caught snippets of whispered conversations as they passed. "That's the DeMarcos. Don't cross them. They practically own the city." Inside the conference room, they took their seats at the head of the table. Mia watched Luca as he addressed the board members, his voice carrying authority that brooked no argument. He'd changed since they'd first met. Still dangerous, still powerful, but tempered now by something else. Love, perhaps, or the knowledge that he had something worth protecting. Between meetings, they walked through the busy streets of their territory. Shopkeepers nodded respectfully. Street vendors offered their best wares. Everyone knew who they were, what they represented. But more importantly, everyone knew they were untouchable together. Luca's hand rested on the small of her back as they walked, a gesture both protective and possessive. Mia leaned into his touch, remembering how far they'd come. The fear and uncertainty of their early days had been replaced by absolute trust, absolute devotion. "Remember when I was afraid of all this?" she asked softly as they passed a group of their men standing guard outside one of their clubs. Luca's lips curved into a slight smile. "You were never afraid. Cautious, maybe, but never afraid. It's one of the things that drew me to you." They stopped at their favorite cafe, the one where they'd had their first real conversation after that fateful night. The owner hurried to serve them personally, setting out their usual orders without being asked. Here, like everywhere else in their territory, they were treated like royalty. "I never thought I'd find this kind of life," Mia admitted, stirring her coffee. "Never thought I'd want it. And now? Now I couldn't imagine anything else." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "This is who we are. Who we were meant to be." The setting sun painted golden streaks across Luca's office, casting long shadows over the mahogany furniture. Mia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city below transform into a glittering landscape of lights. Behind her, Luca worked at his desk, the soft scratch of his pen against paper a familiar comfort. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed. Gone was the scared girl stranded on a snowy road. In her place stood someone who carried herself with quiet confidence, someone who understood the weight of power and the price of love in their world. "Come here," Luca called softly, pushing away from his desk. Mia turned, drawn to him as she always was. He sat in his leather chair, his presence commanding even in repose. His dark eyes tracked her movement as she crossed the room, and when she reached him, he pulled her into his lap with practiced ease. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her hip. "Everything we've built," she replied, leaning into his touch. "Everything we've survived." The past few years had been a storm of violence and passion, of choices that had shaped them both. They'd faced down enemies, weathered betrayals, and emerged stronger. Their love had been tested in fire and blood, and still, they remained unbroken. "I would burn this city to the ground for you," Luca said, his voice low and intense. "Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours." Mia cupped his face in her hands, studying the features she'd come to know better than her own. The sharp line of his jaw, the subtle scar above his eyebrow, the depths of his eyes that held both darkness and light. "I used to think love was simple," she confessed. "But with us, it's always been complicated. Dangerous, beautiful." Luca's hands tightened on her waist. "Our love isn't simple because we aren't simple people. We're built for this life, the power, the danger, the responsibility, but together we make it work." She thought about their journey, how they'd started as strangers on a dark road, became enemies bound by attraction, and finally emerged as partners in every sense of the word. Their love story was written in both tenderness and violence, in quiet moments and brutal battles. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, running her fingers through his hair. "Choosing me over everything else?" Never, he answered without hesitation. You're the best choice I've ever made, the only choice that matters. His words wrapped around her heart like a promise. This was the man who'd killed for her, who'd risked everything to protect her. The man who showed the world his ruthless face, but saved his gentleness for her alone. I need you to know something, Luca continued, his voice taking on an edge of intensity. No matter what comes next, no matter what threats we face or battles we fight, I will always protect you. You're everything to me, Mia. Everything. She felt the truth of his words in the way he held her, in the fierce protectiveness that radiated from him. This was the core of their relationship. Not just love, but an unshakable commitment to stand together against whatever challenges arose. I know, she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. And I'll protect you too. That's what we do. We protect each other. Luca pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair as he brought her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that still took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, his eyes were dark with emotion. He cradled her face in his hands, his touch reverent. You're mine, forever, he whispered against her lips. For the first time, Mia felt the full weight of those words settle into her soul. This wasn't just a declaration of possession. It was a promise of protection, of partnership, of a love that could withstand anything. In his arms, she found her strength, her purpose, her home. Forever, she agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The morning sun painted Milan's skyline in shades of gold and rose, a stark contrast to the darkness that had surrounded them for so long. Mia stood at the window of Luca's penthouse office, her fingertips pressed against the cool glass as she watched the city come alive below. The storm that had raged through their lives had finally passed, leaving behind a calm she'd never thought possible. Behind her, Luca moved with quiet purpose, his presence filling the room with an energy she'd grown to understand and love. The sound of his footsteps drew closer until his warmth pressed against her back, his arms sliding around her waist. Beautiful morning, he murmured, his lips brushing her temple. Mia leaned into him, allowing herself to fully relax. It feels different now, she said, watching a flock of birds wheel across the sky. Everything feels different. And it was true. The city that had once seemed like a battlefield now felt like their kingdom. The streets that had hosted their darkest moments now held the promise of new beginnings. They'd fought for this peace, paid for it in blood and tears, but they'd won. Luca's hands tightened slightly at her waist, and she could feel the solid strength of him, the unwavering protection he offered. We earned this, he said, his voice carrying that edge of steel she'd come to associate with his absolute certainty. Every moment of peace, every victory. Mia turned in his arms, studying the face she knew better than her own. The sharp angles of his features had softened somewhat in the morning light, but his eyes still held that dangerous gleam that marked him as what he was, a man of power, a force to be reckoned with. Yet when he looked at her, there was tenderness there too, a gentle heat that belonged to her alone. I never thought I'd find peace in this world, she admitted, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. Your world. Our world. His lips curved into a smile that held equal parts pride and satisfaction. Our world, he repeated, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. And we'll rule it together. The words should have frightened her once upon a time, but now they filled her with a quiet confidence. She'd learned to navigate the shadows, to understand the delicate balance of power and protection that defined their lives. More importantly, she'd learned that love could exist in darkness, could even thrive there when tended with care and trust. "The families are falling in line," Luca continued, his thumb tracing circles on her hip. "They've accepted our union, our strength. No one will dare challenge us now." Mia nodded, remembering the recent meetings where rival families had pledged their allegiance. She'd sat beside Luca, every inch his equal, and watched as the old guard bowed to their combined power. It wasn't just fear that drove their respect. It was the recognition of something new, something stronger than the old ways. "We changed things," she said, smoothing her hands over his chest. "Made something better out of all the chaos." "We did." Luca's voice held pride, but also something deeper, a contentment she'd never heard before. "And we'll keep making it better." Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming them both as they stood together in the quiet morning. Below them, the city hummed with life, with possibilities. Their empire stretched across streets and neighborhoods, but their true strength lay in this, in moments of shared understanding, in the unshakable bond they'd forged through fire and storm. Luca's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with familiar ease. "Shall we?" he asked, nodding towards the door. Mia squeezed his hand, feeling the answering pressure of his grip. They had meetings to attend, people to see, an empire to run. But none of it seemed daunting anymore, not with him by her side. Together they moved toward the door, their steps perfectly in sync. This was their world now, not just the territory they controlled or the power they wielded, but the life they'd built together, the love they'd fought to protect. As they walked into their new world, hand in hand, the final words of their story echoed in the air. Together, always. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.